Greetings again everyone, and let's get stuck into reviewing the living daylights out of the new Nikon Z50 Mark II, or just Z52 as I think it's meant to be called, a new low-budget aps-c or DX camera which uses Nikon's mirrorless Z mount. Although I never made a review of it, I did actually get to handle the original Z50 camera back in the day, years ago. It was a tiny little camera which worked okay. It was a little on the slow side and its autofocus was a bit basic. Its limited button layout was a pain, and a screen that only tilts downwards for video work should frankly be outlawed, so not the most compelling option in the world, quite frankly. Well, this new updated version of the camera is bigger and thankfully has quite a few other positive changes. It's actually managed to become a somewhat controversial camera among some other journalists. Some elevate it to the lofty height of being a miniature Z6 Mark III or even Z9, while other reviewers seem just to find it flawed and uninnovative. Its price of $900 body only, or $1,500 with a 16 to 50mm kit lens, means that it's not entirely an entry-level camera, so I'm going to be a little bit firm today. Anyway, I'd like to thank Nikon UK for loaning me one of these cameras for a couple of weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review and they've had no input into the video whatsoever. The first bit of bad news is that the camera is built around Nikon's 20.9 megapixel aps-c sensor, which is now about 8 years old and wasn't really all that impressive when it first hit the market, with noticeably lower resolution than its peers back then and especially today. The second bit of bad news is that the Z52 does not feature in-body image stabilization, well, except for some digital stabilization while shooting video. Now, in all fairness, that's par for the course for a sub $1,000 camera, but still, it's annoying as Nikon's excellent Z-mount prime lenses, which you might want to upgrade to one day, are not often optically stabilized. Fortunately, Nikon zoomable kit lenses, which are actually quite sharp by the way, are optically stabilized, but who just wants to stick to zoom lenses, right? Anyway, those are the camera's chief disadvantages. If you can get past those two issues, then actually you're getting quite a lot of camera for your money here. It has plenty of customizable dials and controls on its body, including 2 on the very front, which in many ways makes it feel like one of Nikon's professional cameras. You get a hot shoe, a little pop-up flash, and an EVF, which, while not being very big, is amazingly bright and clear. The rear screen is bright and high resolution too, and can tilt fully outwards this time, useful for vlogging and much better than the original Z50. For fun, Nikon have even included a color control button, something which I really like to see, which will encourage users to get experimenting with the camera's many interesting color profiles, more of which can be downloaded. There's also a Q light on the front, again useful for video makers. You're also getting a very rugged feeling camera body here, with a solid grip and nicely rubberized texture, as well as a good degree of weather sealing, so the build quality is great for the money you're paying. And in terms of its feature set, well, some of its features are frankly top of the line. The camera has the same X-Speed 7 processor from Nikon Z6 Mark III, the Z8 and the Z9, meaning it can power through your photography like lightning, and you get almost the same autofocus speed, reliability and tracking options as those premium cameras. The subject detection and intelligent 3D tracking options are particularly fantastic, fast and accurate. For sports shooters, the camera even has a pre-release burst capture option, capturing images for up to a full second before you hit the shutter button, which is impressive in this price range and very useful for sport and for some wildlife photography as well. The camera can shoot in JPEG or HEIF, as is normal nowadays, as well as 14-bit RAW in lossless compression or high-efficiency compression modes. The maximum shutter speed is 1/4000th of a second, and the flash sync speed is up to 1/250th of a second. With a mechanical shutter, the fastest shooting speed is a very respectable 11 frames per second. In electronic shutter mode, it can shoot at up to 30 frames per second though, although at that high speed only JPEGs and not RAWs. At 11 frames per second, the camera's buffer will cover you for about 200 raw images, or many more JPEGs, which is fairly generous. Also impressive in this price range is that the camera can shoot 10-bit log video footage using red LUTs. There's also a handy product review mode for content creators. It can shoot 4K at up to 60 frames per second, although unfortunately there's a 1.5 times crop if you shoot at 60 frames per second. When it comes to connectivity, on one side of the camera we get microphone and headphone 3.5mm jacks, followed by micro HDMI and a USB-C port for charging and connectivity. I had some trouble charging the camera with a regular phone charger, but my 30-watt power delivery charger had no problems at all, so that's something just to bear in mind. Through that USB-C port, the Z50II can also be used as a webcam. The camera is also compatible with Nikon's imaging cloud service, uploading your images to their service automatically when the camera is connected to Wi-Fi. We get a single SD card slot on the bottom, which is UHS 2 compliant. The battery has a slightly higher capacity than that of the original Z50. I got about 350 shots out of it. But I did have issues while video shooting. The camera kept warning me that the battery was about to run out, but when I switched back to still shooting mode, it was nearly full again. So that's a little bug Nikon might want to iron out. So overall, the camera has quite a lot of power to it and some impressive features for your money. It handles very solidly too, with lots of controls to get your fingers around and a nice little EVF. It has excellent autofocus and some very fast frame rates, so depending on the image quality of that aging sensor, things are looking quite good so far. Alright, well, let's take a look at still image quality. Firstly, RAW versus JPEG. On the left we have a RAW image, in the middle JPEG at default sharpening, on the right JPEG at minimum sharpening. As you can see, even though it's only a 21 megapixel image, the RAW is still capturing a good amount of detail. The JPEG image in the middle is over-sharpened, leading to a very bold looking image but a loss of detail due to blooming on contrasting edges. In my opinion, your best bet is to turn sharpening way down to preserve image detail, then add some sharpening in post. Your editing software is likely to do a better job than a camera at brushing the image up. Okay, let's see about high ISO image quality. ISO 100 to 800 sees good detail and low noise, but ISO 1600 takes a sharp turn downwards, with the image quality already looking a little mushy. ISOs 3200 to 6400 are looking even worse, with 12800 looking really noisy. So yeah, a bit disappointing really. The camera's JPEG engine isn't doing an especially good job of sharpening the image properly, and despite it only being a 21 megapixel sensor, image noise and mushiness at high ISO levels are a little weak. The image quality is still perfectly usable, but it's a bit last generation, a bit behind the competition. But the camera's colours are very lovely, I'll mention that. Classic Nikon colours here, although the white balance was slightly on the warm side I found quite often. Let's take a quick look at dynamic range. As you can see here, when shooting RAW, you can pull an average amount of detail out of your shadows, whether using the mechanical or electronic shutter. This is about par for the course for an aps-c camera sensor. Okay, let's see about video quality. First, 4K at 25 frames per second. Okay, we're seeing lots of detail here, some very crisp 4K footage. That's because the footage is being oversampled. It seems a little noisy though. Slight noise is visible at ISO 800 and becomes a real problem at only ISO 1600. ISO 3200 is just about usable, but 6400 and beyond are just too mushy now. Again, that's a slightly below average performance. The camera really needed a better sensor, I think. Well, let's up the frame rate and look at 60p, which, annoyingly, suffers from a 1.5 times crop. The footage is a lot softer now, and about a stop noisier overall, with ISO 800 and 1600 getting rather noisy. ISO 3200 and beyond are looking dreadful, so that's a pretty weak performance for 4K 60p. Keep those ISOs as low as possible if you're shooting at that speed. Oh, and here's some footage from the 1080p mode at 120 frames per second, which I think looks absolutely spectacular. That is some of the sharpest, most detailed 1080p footage you can get, and all at a very high speed. Impressive. Well, let's take a look at rolling shutter. In 4K 60p mode, rolling shutter is pretty strong actually, and this is also the case when shooting at 25 frames per second. If you want to get rid of it, shoot at 1080p, where even at the highest frame rates, rolling shutter is no longer an issue. And finally, my vlogging test. Here's some footage at 16mm with both optical and digital VR turned on. It's still pretty bumpy, really, although in fairness, what with the crop that the digital stabilization applies, an ultra-wide angle lens would have been much better here. Overall, the Z50II is a tricky one for me to evaluate because no matter what I say, I feel I'm in danger of crucifixion in the comments section, but honestly, I think the best way to think of it is that the Nikon Z50II, in this price range anyway, is a fast, very well handling aps-c stills camera with great autofocus and other capabilities, which is somewhat let down by its rather old image sensor. It's also not the most exciting and innovative camera ever designed, but it will get the job done, and it admittedly handles very well. In many ways, it's a fantastic camera actually, which is just let down by an 8-year-old 20 megapixel sensor that I hope I never have to see again. Please Nikon, it's time for a new DX sensor. Thanks for watching everyone, I hope you found that review helpful and not too controversial. Thanks to all my Patreon supporters who do such an amazing job in keeping this channel going sponsorship free for so many years. I really appreciate you. Check my Patreon page in the description below, where supporters get all kinds of exclusive bonus content and a warm fuzzy feeling deep inside for helping to keep this channel trucking on. Ciao for now everyone.